Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and very happy to see this level of attendance on the first day of reInvent, and also to have such a fresh audience, because by the time we get to Thursday, I'm sure you will not be quite as fresh, right? So innovation on the cloud is no longer just a competitive advantage. It's now the status quo to be able to achieve that. Your competitors are innovating on the cloud. We know this. They're moving very quickly. This is now a must to operate a business in this digital age. And it's important to remember that this is something that moves very quickly, and that it requires constant attention, and the benefit of a partner in doing so can be very useful. Promise not to be too salesy on you. In this session, we're going to talk about some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, some of the reasons that companies may be a little bit slower to move to innovate on the public cloud and AWS in particular. We're going to talk about some of the ways to unblock those challenges and how we can help move you forward. And the way that we're going to be doing that today, I'm going to give a short keynote here. I promise not to waste too much of your time before we get to the good stuff, and then we're going to get to a customer panel discussion with three of our customers who could talk about their interesting use cases. So what could your organization do if you had limitless innovation? If you had the ability to spin out new products, test products, to cheaply innovate, test whether things work, move quickly. If it doesn't work, discard it, not have a borne cost for a long period of time. Imagine how that would free you up to be able to focus on the long-term strategy aspects of your business, where you can have the technology support what you're doing from a business perspective. This means being no longer held back by outdated systems. This means no longer having to deal with long-term hardware contracts or refreshes. I'm sure many of you already understand that benefit, but it's worth reiterating that the 3 to 5 year hardware refresh cycle is painful for everybody, and you're locked into whatever choice you make at that time. Imagine if you were freed from that. So let's talk about some of the things that slow down a company's innovation on the cloud. Some key areas that are often points of friction within the organization that have to be moved through. So security is one. I will say, in full transparency, less and less so now, not like when we first started working with companies in the public cloud in 2014 or so. Back then, it was a much harder push. It still exists today, in particular with those companies that have not yet adopted or embraced AWS, where you still have an element within the organization that is suspicious or doesn't trust that the controls around security are there. There's concerns about data breaches, obviously wanting to not be in the news for all the wrong reasons. As they say, there's regulatory compliance, and then there's safe migration. How do we safely migrate in a secure manner into the public cloud? And migration is not a one method serves all. There's multiple ways to deal with that, but security still remains a concern, right? Next, inertia around the benefits of the cost benefit of moving into the public cloud versus staying where they are. So we all know it's very easy to stay exactly where you are. Not making a choice is perhaps the easiest and potentially most dangerous choice that you can make. The frog in the boiling water, I'm sure everyone's familiar with that metaphor. Staying where you are becomes very easy. You have your same hardware vendors, you're locked in, but there are risks there as well, and we can go into those. But not making a choice or not having a proactive decision-making process within your organization to move forward in a technological sense, in other words, to adopt services in the public cloud as part of a bigger strategy, is going to keep you where you are to your detriment. The other is data. So a third area where we see concerns is around data. Data grows constantly. We all know this, the cost of storing it, the cost of organizing it, the complexity of the data, the ways in which that data is used, not just for archival, sometimes to satisfy compliance, regulatory frameworks, but also to leverage that, to make that data useful in a way that you can leverage for your business needs, be that analytics, be that moving on to more advanced things like machine learning and ultimately AI, and even Gen AI, perhaps trained, modified, grounded in your particular data sets. All of those and the growth of that data all become potential obstacles that people will look at as, how am I going to move all of that? My data is no longer going to live within my four walls. Am I comfortable with that? And those are the concerns that we're hearing out there. Of course, the good thing is, on the flip side of that, is that what happens once you move into the public cloud is freeing in all of those elements. And we're going to talk about some of the ways in which that works. So if we don't move, if inertia kicks in and we don't adopt the public cloud and we don't adopt AWS and its advanced services, what happens? What are the risks? Obviously, higher infrastructure costs, those continue to go up, and they remain our concern. We're the ones that, as the owners of IT or the tech systems that run the applications that support our lines of business, we're the ones responsible for vetting hardware partners, identifying the best partner out there, making a decision, avoiding falling simply for the marketing aspect, doing the R&D around them, making sure that they satisfy our needs. And then once we made that bet, we're locked in, like I said, for a 3 to 5 year term. There are also, how do I say this gently, broad commercial reasons why this can sometimes be challenging. There's lock-in that can happen even when it's within your four walls, as I'm sure we're all familiar. Next is agility and innovation. So yes, there are lots of ways to innovate without using the public cloud, but what the difference here is that the public cloud is making that what I believe Andy Jassy used to refer to as undifferentiated heavy lifting aspect of their concern. We're no longer concerned about how much power do we have to our data centers, to our racks? What's our PUE? Are we cooling efficiently? Are we getting the right hardware partners in? Do we have the right IOPS and growth plan and storage availability going forward? Do we have the right network? How do we handle upgrades? Do we have the right latency for what it is we're trying to do? If I have compliance and regulatory framework around my applications, what am I doing for business continuity and disaster recovery? And am I paying too much for all of that because I don't have the ability to spin things up on demand and I have to make these commitments ahead of time? So all of that are risks around remaining where you are rather than moving forward. Next, I think I referenced this at the beginning, competitiveness. Remember, your competitors are doing this. They're already there. They're moving. They're quickly there. And they're taking advantages of services that if you're not to appeal to your FOMO, I will shamelessly do that, but you're not getting that, right? And that's a real impact to your business, is that you're not able to move as quickly as your competitors are, and you're playing catch up in that regard. Next, security and compliance. Again, I said this is less of an issue nowadays. I think most people have realized at this point that the security rigor and practice that AWS employs around this is all they do around the globe for hundreds of thousands, if not more, companies and workloads and application types. And they're focused on that and adding new tooling constantly that you don't have to develop yourself, that you simply get to take advantage of. So that's another thing. Just because you have it within your four walls does not mean that you're at the cutting edge of security practices. And likely it means quite the opposite. And I think that's largely understood by a lot of technology leaders today, but it's always worth going into. The other key aspect here that I want to mention is, and this has been referenced before, but AWS in particular is more of a platform in which once your workloads are there and your selection of services, your architecture, your best practices are established, everything after that in terms of new services are free upgrades. You're not paying for that. You're not having to go install some new capability. It just appears as a new service or a new functionality that you can choose to leverage or not. You don't have to leverage every service, obviously. But it becomes an option now that is trivial for you to experiment with cheaply. And if it doesn't work for you, don't work with that particular service. If it does, adopt it, make it part of your process. This is one of the key benefits is the speed and the fact that the platform grows with you. So I want to call out the fact that innovation in the public cloud is it's not something you choose to do. You do it once, done and dusted. That was great. We're done, guys. Now what? It's an ongoing process. So this means staying constantly aware of what the capabilities of the platform are, how they interface with your application, how they interface with changing compliance requirements, and we've seen this with GDPR and evolutions of ISO and HIPAA and high trust, and these things keep changing and new requirements are there. You need to stay abreast of that, and you need to stay aware of how that interacts with the services that you're using, how you're using them, your applications, what your applications are composed of, et cetera. So this journey begins with migration, or if you're lucky enough to be doing a greenfield application, which is always a pleasure, you get to start there and go to town. But like most of us, you probably have applications that you're going to look to move. And that can be challenging, right? Because you could be using giant boat anchors of systems that simply don't translate into cloud services. There's some examples of that I won't mention. And then there's also just the way that a lot of legacy applications have been architected, right? Sometimes they're tightly coupled. I have seen in the wild, talking to customers and prospects, static IP addressing built into the application components, which makes me shudder. But you will still see that out there with some legacy applications. So migration can be quite varied in what it is and the method that you approach, and different ways to do this, right? But looking at, for example, good workload candidates and how do we move them in, things that are loosely coupled, things that are low risk, things that we can experiment with quickly, and then come up with a plan for how we address the harder to move things. Another method that we've seen for migration is the standard lift and shift of the app. Where it's possible to do so, you may move this into the public cloud just for expedience reasons. This could be because you're shutting down a data center, but you may have long-lived VMs, private cloud and public cloud, or whatever you want to call it. It's not very cloudy, but at least you're there, and you can begin adopting the other services that are around it and begin transitioning your application, which falls into the next stage, which is optimization, which is never over, right? Optimization means taking a hard look at how your app is running, getting all the observability components that are in there, leveraging the services that help with that, and then looking at the health of the application, performance, and then a really critical one, which I know everybody has a focus on, is cost as well. So watching how you're spending your money in the cloud. Are you getting the best bang for your buck? Where are you spending where it's not necessary? Where you need right sizing? Where can a service replace an instance? And this is pretty common areas where we will help customers to dig into. Next, you're going to move on to that data aspect I was talking about before. One of the big drivers of the migration aspect at all is so many of these amazing services around analytics and AI and machine learning are cloud resident, and having your data right there is a win for you. And the many different ways that data can be stored and composed, whether in columnar databases like Redshift, or in S3 for just basic binary storage, or cost-effective tiers of that, or simply on EBS for ready access from EC2. Any number of the ways that data can be stored and accessed is a win on the public cloud because of the services that are there, AWS in particular, but it also unlocks your ability to apply some of the more advanced services to that data more readily. So this is where you begin to unlock some of the capability around innovation that you would not have had if you'd kept it in your four walls, or with a provider, a regional provider of some kind. So that's key to keep in mind. The next is we look at secure scaling. Obviously, optimization never ends. You're keeping your eye on how you're using your data. You're still identifying what workloads you have to migrate, but you need to be looking at how do we grow. If the application supports a line of business, you can expect that it's going to need to scale if that line of business scales to a certain degree. Obviously, you want those not linearly correlated, but the cloud allows you to do that. By advancing the ways in which you are deploying your applications, supporting them, which service selections you make, you don't have to scale linearly with the line of business, or with your revenue, with your customer acquisition. All those two things can be related, but they're not tightly bound, right? And all of that is what becomes available once you make that conscious, intentional move to adopt AWS going forward and avoid the inertia trap overall. So the number of services, the ever-expanding toolkit that AWS offers, I mentioned before, the rate of change, and you'll see it this week, doubtless there will be some booths that wrap up on day 2. That was a fun game we used to play in the early days of what service announcements eclipse what small businesses out there. The rate of innovation on AWS is incredibly fast. And just staying abreast of what is out there and what its use case is, its serviceability to your particular application becomes a real challenge. So that's one of the things that we often help our customers with is kind of acting as an R&D arm for them for, all right, you're running this type of application, leveraging these services. Hey, did you know this new one was announced? Is there a way that we can sandbox that out, test it, validate its performance aspects, its cost aspects, all of that. So there is a certain degree of attention that has to be paid with what's out there so that even though you're on AWS, you want to make sure you're actually leveraging what new services have come out because they've come out for a reason. They're not deploying a new service just to say so. It's because it scratches an itch that you might likely have. So when we think about this problem on a whole of avoiding the inertia, moving into the public cloud, and rapidly innovating, the best way to approach a big, hairy problem like that is to break it down into smaller steps, right? So first, identify high-impact areas. Where can we get the most bang for a buck? Do we have those loosely coupled applications that we can move in? Can we experiment cheaply with that? Can we validate our assumptions about how performance will be, how cost will be on those areas? And is there a readily accessible value? Because remember, the way that you win hearts and minds in any well-run business is you show that you get more value for the technological choice that you made than you previously had been. So measure, assess, and be able to validate, make those use cases. Security needs to be prioritized early. Obviously, there's a buy-in necessary from your CISO and the InfoSec org. Less of a problem, as I mentioned, nowadays, but it is still there, so it's worth considering. Develop an experimentation culture within your team. So this is something that we did in another incarnation years ago when we moved from traditional infrastructure into AWS. Basically, taking our engineering teams into a room and being, listen, network guys, you got to learn VPCs. Compute guys, you got to learn instances. Nowadays, it's a lot more complicated than those basic services, but encourage them to experiment. Give them sandbox accounts. Give people. You can limit your risks there. You can put budgets on the sandbox accounts. You can limit the security risks by stipulating what data and programmatically making it only accessible within that account. But get your teams to experiment, encourage that, do hackathons, do innovation sprints, let the teams get familiar with it and start enjoying it. And any good engineer, when they step into that playground, if they've not been there prior, is going to be excited about the work and move the ball forward there. Next, engage cloud expertise. So we will toot our RapidScale horn here and say we're happy to help you with that as well. But reach out there. There's tons of really good informative works out there, good talks. There's plenty of good talks to reinvent. Go back and see every keynote. I watch the Werner Vogel ones pretty frequently and still do revisit. So go out there and start consuming and get familiar with that. And then, like I said earlier, set milestones, set goals so you can measure yourself. And this is the way that you convince the business to move forward. You become an advocate for this if you can prove the benefit to the rest of the business on the choices that you're making. So we encourage that. RapidScale is happy to support you in any way that we can going forward, and it's an exciting journey. And with that, I'm going to welcome you to the second half of today's session, where we're going to dive into a customer panel discussion. This is going to be moderated and should offer some insightful perspectives from some companies who are directly shaping the future. We're excited to hear their thoughts, and we hope that you are as well. At this point, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to my colleague, Ben Paluba, who's out there somewhere. He's the head of innovation at RapidScale, and he's going to introduce the panel and engage in a discussion with all of you.
Right.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Howdy, folks. Just quickly, we have a bunch of folks from the healthcare industry who are going to help us to talk about the themes that Jason set up earlier. We're going to dive into a dynamic discussion, bring everybody up to discuss some cases, and hopefully that'll get a little deeper into what we've been talking about. So just going to introduce the folks who you'll be speaking with today. And hopefully we get, is that giving us slides? What do I have here? Oh, I got you. All right, sweet. Okay, so we have Stephen Friedland. Stephen is from a group called MIB. They're a membership corporation owned by a number of member insurance companies, and they provide a number of technical services to those insurance companies, including fraud detection, and they're looking to protect those companies from, as well as their policyholders from issues with dealing with fraud. So you'll see Stephen is the chief architect at MIB, and he's going to talk to us a bit about some of those healthcare cases. We also have John Snow from Manifest Medics. They are California's largest not-for-profit health information network. They are running one of the largest health information networks in the country. They have over 1,800 participating healthcare organizations, and they support the 17 major health plans in California. John is the managing director of technology operations at Manifest Medics, and he architected the Sapphire solution for the state of California Department of Public Health, and he's going to talk about some interesting things here for us. We have Dipin Gajara. He is the Director of Cloud Engineering Operations and DevSecOps for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. BCBS, Blue Cross Blue Shield, you all know they are the Blues, one of the largest health insurance organizations in the United States. And so Dipin's been helping to innovate and move them into AWS and figure all of that out. So you'll hear about these cases. Why don't we bring up the panel? Come on up, guys, and we'll start to dig into this. I think what we're going to do is tie together some of these themes around innovation and how we've been able to use AWS to drive innovation and to move a number of initiatives forward that without AWS you just really would have not been able to do. And like Jason was saying, you would have fallen behind your competition. You would have had a lot of issues just figuring out how you could even deliver and access some of these services. So I'm going to sit down with the folks over here. Let's give them a nice warm welcome. Thanks for joining us. Cheers. All right, excuse me, I've got some questions on my phone, so I'm going to be doing that. John, maybe you can start us off by letting us know what are the key innovations you've achieved with AWS in just managing the health information exchange platform, particularly around patient data and real-time access?
Sure. When Manifest Medics migrated our solution to AWS on the HIE platform 7 years ago, it was maybe 10 or 15 million patients, and since we've gone to 40 million patients, so having a system that can scale to that size that quickly, especially with the health events that have happened over the past 5 years, being able to do that at scale has really helped us. Being able to have limitless storage and scale not only up but back as we kind of inhale and exhale as the market kind of has more and less activity across California. So,
yeah, and do you think like that without some situation like being able to use AWS to do those things, like where would you have been in that world otherwise, right?
Yeah, exactly. It would have been nearly impossible to have that level of growth. The way healthcare data is structured between just simple lab testing of positive, negative, all the way up to imaging, long clinical notes, these pieces of data get to be very, very large. And when you're dealing with a population the size of California, that amount of data comes in very fast. So without being able to leverage AWS's ability to scale on servers, on data, on functions to be able to process that data in, to be able to database it, and then build meaningful reports to our downstream customers at scale, it just wouldn't be possible in any other sense. So.
Gotcha. Okay. If we can pass over to Stephen here. Stephen, can you tell us what ways AWS has help you guys to transform how you handle insurance data, especially regarding faster retrieval and insights generation?
Yeah, so MIB, as you heard, does fraud detection services for the life insurance industry. So we get data from most of the life insurance companies across, across the US and Canada. There's a lot of insights in that data, but it's previously been siloed in a mainframe. So because of that, we decided to build a data warehouse based on AWS Redshift, S3, and Glue. And we started by building out some of our existing reports and then enhancing them. We learned that there were a lot more insights that we could gather, so we, from there, launched a new product for the life insurance industry that provides insights on insurance application activity. And that's since been a new product launch for us. And so that's working out well.
So in terms of launching that new product, right, and being able to deliver something like that, can you talk just quickly about how AWS and the services that it kind of puts at your fingertips allowed you to dig in and do that rather than having to go through some giant transformation on your own?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible to run your reports, at least in reports and gain insights out of a mainframe, especially an operational data store that you don't want to be running large reports during the day. So you can't go in and try a bunch of different queries, try to connect disparate data. By putting it into Redshift in a columnar format, it gives us much more flexibility to be able to get those insights and to be able to allow our employees and maybe eventually our customers to do on-demand queries.
Awesome, thank you. Can we pass over to Dipin? Dipin, can you tell us how AWS has enabled you guys to adapt a more resilient approach to DR, disaster recovery, and improve your data accessibility throughout your network?
Sure. So for Blue Cross, we started our cloud journey about 4 or 5 years back. And obviously, at that time, as we were growing, we never realized that scalability and resilience is one of the top priorities. Last year, we were under audit, and obviously, the scope was expanded to the cloud infrastructure. And we decided to basically go and do our DR testing on the cloud. And we were not sure how to approach disaster recovery. So we partnered with AWS and basically utilized their MAP program, which is a migration acceleration program, to help us understand how to devise a strategy for disaster recovery. And they came up with a very innovative idea of using a service called FIS, which is fault injection service, which helps you to simulate a systemic failure in your system without actually bringing down the system. So in the olden days, obviously, you had to bring down the production, to do the DR testing. This system just helps you avoid doing that. And in the sense, we were able to achieve and run our disaster recovery test in matter of hours as compared to days without bringing the production system down, which was a key aspect for us.
And what type of implications does bringing that system down and then having to put it back up again without something like this fault injection service, put on top of you?
Well, there's a lot of testing which will be needed, correct, to ensure that once you bring down the production system, it can have a lot of implications on your application and services which are catering to subscribers. So, as well as the enrollment, specifically if you are doing in the open enrollment time.
Great, thank you. And just for the audience, just to understand, what we're trying to do is discuss some themes here around what I would call continuous innovation and how AWS enables that, right? So you can hear through the cases that we're talking about is that without being able to rely on the bevy of services that are presented constantly through AWS, it becomes really onerous on both IT and technical development, product development, forces within your organization to develop those types of things themselves, right? When you can rely on a giant list of potential services that you can use, and like Jason was saying, you can have your teams access and experiment with all the time. You can always be trying to figure out, how you can do something new, how you can help the business grow, how you can continue to power the technology side of your business further. So just going to dive into some more questions around that theme, talking about agility and efficiency. So if we can go back to John, how has AWS helped you to improve your agility, meeting patient demands, especially during, say, like a high demand period, like during the pandemic when everything was shifting under your feet?
Yeah, and we definitely needed to depend on our partners in that time. Obviously, the hospitals were under a ton of stress, so we were aiming to leverage our networks to be able to deliver service as quickly as possible to the hospitals to be able to allow that access to the patient data to be able to scale. Inversely, on the platform that we run for the California Department of Public Health, our Sapphire solution, we were directly taking in all of the records from all the laboratories all over the state of California, and the amount of testing that occurred during that time fluctuated very greatly. So being able to scale our systems in order to be able to intake that data and take it on and pass it to local health jurisdictions all across the state really helped, push California to helping to deal with the pandemic, not only from a statewide level, but being able to get the data into the hands of the local health jurisdictions that needed it. So our ability to adapt with our network and the ingestion of the data and the parsing of the data, it was critical for us to be able to scale that up and down as the pandemic spread. So.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can move over to Stephen. Stephen, can you talk to us about Lambda and serverless and how they fit into MIB's automation strategy?
Yeah, serverless is very important. I think it's probably most helpful to illustrate by a contrast of two different applications that we migrated into the cloud. One was done recently, and it was not built in a cloud-native way. We had a deadline to get out of a data center, and so we couldn't re-architect the application. So we ended up spinning up EC2s, basically lift and shift, if you will, although it's never really a lift and shift. But we put those servers on AWS and installed the applications on top of them, including all the security tooling, including setting up all the patching and things like that. So it was a lot of work, and it's expensive to run. Compare that to another application that we had done several years ago. This was previously built using containers, so it was cloud native at the outset. And we were able to put that onto ECS and spin up the right number of tasks per microservice. There was 20 some odd microservices, so we were able to spin up those tasks and run them as needed. And it was a much more efficient use of AWS. Obviously, we weren't dealing with additional security tooling and patching and things like that, and it was much less expensive to run.
So basically saying, that when you were able to switch into cloud-native postures or more cloud-native postures, it was helpful from a number of perspectives: cost, agility, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think just using AWS by looking at EC2s and spinning up servers is probably not the most efficient way. If you can leverage any of the serverless capabilities, you're going to gain a cost benefit. For
sure, thank you. We can move over to Dipin here. Cost management is critical for you guys, and how has moving workloads into Postgres with AWS impacted cost efficiency and agility for you?
Sure. So we have been obviously utilizing tools like Cloud Health to monitor our cloud expenses on a daily basis. In fact, we have set up alerts to see any spikes if they might have, correct? So, but as the data is growing, we have been on the journey for past 4 or 5 years, and the data is growing leaps and bounds. Through the Cloud Health, we were able to figure out that some of our databases were having spikes specifically, which were heavy in very I/O types of throughput, correct? So the throughput was going up to 95, 98%, and the cloud cost for some of those Postgres databases were just spiking up. We partnered with RapidScale and AWS to understand how we can remediate some of those costs, and we were advised to look into I/O optimized Postgres Aurora, which basically helps you mitigate some of those costs, and you might have some hit on performance, but at the same time, if you have workload which are very heavy in I/O throughput, it's much better option to go with I/O optimized databases. So we did some POCs. We understood that there are no performance implications, and we were able to leverage the I/O optimized PostgreSQL and bring our cost down by about 50% or so.
Great. And then just a question for all of you in terms of cloud nativity and agility. What have you noticed in terms of being able to both save money, but also to like move those workloads, transform once you've migrated? Like how has that worked in your organizations? Just quickly, if maybe you could talk about that. I know that sometimes we have to bring things over, and we have to figure out then what do we do with these things that we've brought over potentially like already in another type of architecture. Like Stephen, you were saying you had kind of 2 types of things going on, right? You have some server-based kind of data center architectures. You have some Kubernetes or containerized workloads running as well. Like I think also, John, like just in terms of your network, like what would that have looked like, without the ability to scale up, scale down seamlessly, even if you were scaling things in a data center, and also just for the database side of things, like we know that costs, especially when we talk about cost control, cost savings in the cloud, a lot of people look at things like, I'm going to take out a reserved instance, or I'm going to do all of these things. But when we really look at cost savings, it comes down to like what type of database engines are we running? What's our license profile look like? So maybe if you guys could just give a quick 1 minute on any of that, if we could maybe just jump over to John.
I can.
Yeah.
Just going off the common theme there, that the serverless functions and not necessarily having to have everything running as an EC2 instance is really kind of the beauty of it all. But the important part is that beginning of taking in whatever application that you're currently running, understanding what it does, knowing what you can do in AWS, and then taking those components out. And from Manifest Medics' perspective, we have over 1,800 connections across the state. We have a very large VPN instance to make a lot of those connections, but it is way easier to run an application load balancer and have TLS connections off of that. So there are way easier ways to make these connections, and we have large sets of SFTP to take in data, and using transfer family is just a way more faster, efficient, and cost-efficient way to do that. So I would say understanding what you're doing, and then looking for those tools within AWS, and then taking it to another level. Once you get those services up and running, you can hook them into a Lambda function to spin up another job to be able to handle that data, and it makes actually expanding your application a lot easier. So
just go around the horn.
Sure. Yeah, I think managing the data in, we talked about the ECS, which is the application level, but you also have the data, and that's really important to understand what your data is and on your source and your target platforms. one example that I can share is that we had data. It was in a Postgres database, so that was easy enough for us to go from on-prem to RDS. But we realized that some of the data was stored as files in blobs in the database. Like, why is that there? That's the majority of the size of the database. We can just take those out, drop them into S3, put a reference to that, and we probably to a sixth of the size of the database just by doing that and making that one tweak. And now we're leveraging the inexpensive S3 storage as well. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Great, thank you. Dipin?
Yeah, so as Steve mentioned, that you can leverage lambdas, and obviously you can have your workload running on the EC2, but all depends on what kind of workloads you are running. So you have to constantly go reevaluate the workload types, correct? So let's say if you are running a batch job which doesn't need a EC2 instance up and running 24/7, you just need to run a job once a week, once a day. It's a much better idea to leverage the Lambda function so that you're not subscribing to a reserved instance. And obviously from the data side, you look at some other aspects, whether, let's say we had Oracle database, which was pretty heavy in running, and obviously the cost was spiking up. We realized it's much easier for us to swap those workloads within database to DynamoDB and PostgreSQL to leverage some of the cost savings, right? So it all depends on what your workloads are on the data side as well as on the containers, and constantly evaluate them and tweak them to get the best performance and cost benefits.
Great, thank you. So continuing on this improvement and innovation in AWS theme, right? As we go through that journey, we start to unlock some more capabilities for the organization, especially through data, AI. What can we do with our data? What can we now start to push into as we start to transform from sort of data center architectures into more cloud native architectures, deal with things like cost optimization, cost control, and then really be able to see like what does the future hold for us. So John, maybe you could start for us. I know you're doing some things with Bedrock, looking at how you're going to deal with AI, applying some models, doing some machine learning there. How do you envision AI helping you to transform data management practices while still dealing with all the compliance in the healthcare world?
Yeah. The beauty of Bedrock is that it is running in your own environment. You don't have to worry about it going out to the public model or anything like that. You're going to be able to run it right there in your AWS. So Manifest Medics is constantly looking for ways to innovate, take on this huge amount of data that we have, and we hear it from the provider level as well too. The providers are asking to review giant patient charts that have pages and pages and pages of clinical notes and things like that. So looking to leverage things to do summaries, accurate summaries for them, translate a lot of those clinical notes into coding. A lot of AI models can handle that within Bedrock. And another problem that we're looking to address in the world is leveraging a few different models within Bedrock to take on sensitive data filtering. So a lot of times information comes in on a patient for a particular condition. It may contain data that it's not supposed to about a different condition. That data needs to get filtered out. It's very cumbersome for clinicians, caseworkers to read through documents and find out that there's something incorrect about it and send it back. So having a large language model go through and take chunks of data out of a document and look for sensitive terms against the model can save clinicians and caseworkers hours and hours of time in being able to properly work their case documents. So we see the ability for Bedrock and all of the models that it is serving out as a great way to take on this large amount of data and being able to take it on in different ways. So,
just quickly, one of the things you mentioned early is that Bedrock and just generally the AWS services allow you to run one of these large models or publicly available, in quotes, models within your own environment. Can you just explain what that means? I think this is what people are generally confused about, like where does your data go when you put it into the model, in quotes, and how is that working?
Yeah. So within Bedrock, there's you basically subscribe to whatever model that you're looking to do with it, and you can just go in and test with it as well too. You can, kind of interact with it in the chatbot way that we're kind of familiar with, without serving it complex data. So you can kind of test with it once you subscribe to it. Once you have that subscription, you're taking it into your AWS account, and it's running locally. So it's taking that entire model, and it's just setting up and running in your AWS Bedrock. So that way, as soon as it's done running, it's destroyed, and it's no longer containing any of your data. And the data doesn't really live in Bedrock. You're sending it back to S3 or wherever you're keeping that origination data. So
Right, and also just that the data that you're feeding into even a model that might be publicly available it's a separate instance of that model for you. And your data doesn't go back to, say, like the company that makes the model or whoever created the model.
Yeah. So if for example, we want to take on running Sonnet in our Bedrock, we're pulling down that model, running it essentially locally, but it's in our local AWS account. And then as soon as we're done using the model, we cut it off and it's gone. So that's the beauty of it. That keeps us secure, especially in the sensitive data that we're working with, that we're looking to feed to the model. We don't have any interest in serving to the public model. So being able to run these models in localized instances is a key factor for us. It just wouldn't be possible without it. So.
Great. Can we hand to Stephen? Yeah. Stephen, I know the fraud detection security world is a big ground right now for AI and being able to use it. What do you see in terms of AI and MIB's future? How are you guys thinking about this?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure everybody's trying to wrap their heads around how AI is going to work in their personal and professional lives. For us at MIB, we do get a lot of data from a variety of sources. And, I think providing that data back to our clients in a way that they can easily digest it is important. As John said, summarization is probably the most obvious way that we could help that along. Providing some key insights along with that summarization could be very useful. There is also, as you mentioned, fraud detection. There's insurance application anomaly detection. There's a lot of different ways that both the insurers and the applicants can game the system. So, using AI to detect those type of anomalies, I think, could be an important way to do that. I will add, though, I think, early on in this whole thing with AI, human in the loop is an important piece of it, because the AIs will get better, but they're maybe not there yet. And then finally, I'll just say that I think the biggest challenge is probably not going to be technical. It's going to be the regulatory environment, because it always takes time for that to catch up.
Absolutely, thank you. Maybe we can pass over to Dipin for. I know BCBS is exploring Gen AI. How are you balancing the innovation that you're looking to achieve with the regulatory requirements and compliance requirements in the healthcare space?
Sure. So as everyone knows, healthcare is a very regulated industry. We are taking a very cautious approach, especially from data governance and risk aspect. So as John mentioned, we have our dedicated AWS instance, and we have set up a LLM model over there with all our benefits and coverage data, specifically in S3. And this being all non-PHI data, we are restricting all our developers to only work with the non-PHI data, specifically on the benefits and coverage. Very similar case to John. When subscriber call into Blue Cross, they would want to know whether a specific medicine is covered by the coverage, or if they have certain disease, whether that will be covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. It takes a lot of effort for us to go through all the documents and look up or summarize what the right solution should be. So we are using context-based search, especially for Gen AI. And there are a lot of models, but we are using one specific model, which is dedicated and hosted internally, which is going pretty well. And on top of that, we are also exploring Bedrock, especially their RAG solution, to see which works for us. So we are taking a very cautious approach to Gen AI.
Gotcha. So it seems like you're finding spaces where you can use, I guess, public information basically, and have AI summarize or chew through that information to be able to provide a better customer experience. Is that really what you're talking about at this point?
Yeah, so this is all non-PHI data. It's all benefits and summary. Our second phase, which we are trying to approach, is having an internal Gen AI platform, which will enable all Blue Cross associates to go and basically do POCs on some of the PHI data. But for now, we are just restricting them to non-PHI data.
Great. So thank you. And I know AI is a big bugaboo out there for everybody, and there's a lot going on around it, and I'm sure we're all thinking about how to leverage. One last question for everybody, if you have something to talk about. What would you recommend for healthcare organizations aiming to foster an innovative mindset and move faster, maximizing AWS's potential? Just like a quick something that you might advocate.
Yep. So I think obviously there's no doubt that everyone needs to be on the cloud. As it's very agile, you can obviously have it more secured. You have resiliency, you have HA. On top of that, you can move much, much faster based on the cloud approach. But as far as the journey is concerned, not every team is equipped to handle the AWS or any cloud solutioning, because there are a lot of aspects, especially security, cost, and security governance. So my recommendation is, if you don't have large enough team, ensure that you partner with the right MSP provider, as well as ensure that the culture where you're bringing on the cloud solution is enabled to run much faster in the organization.
Thank you. I can just pass along.
Yeah, I think the security space question is great. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the presentation, that being able to inherit high trust controls directly from AWS is a big advantage for Manifest Medex. It's a core competency of us to have that certification, and being able to take on AWS's SOC 2 already is a key piece for our security growth. Within our healthcare space, I think as well on the innovation piece, and it was a common theme discussed among us, is there's a lot of data, and being able to take in data different ways, whether it's in a database or S3 or Redshift, as we all talked about. Our healthcare data is structured in different ways, and being able to make meaningful outcomes from that is a key component for all of us across all of our businesses. So all of those services are really key to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take an organizational approach to this question. I think there are 4 key things that an organization needs to do. One is to get the executive team on board with a cloud-first strategy, because that eliminates any ambiguity about what you're going to do with your next application. I think you need to provide training access, whether it's AWS Skill Builder or a Cloud Guru or some kind of on-demand training, so that the people can skill up and even get certified. I think if you provide some kind of a sandbox account that people can log into and play with the technology, it's one thing to learn about it, but you really don't learn it until you use it. And then finally, collaboration. I think it's important to collaborate with the different groups within your own organization, especially your security and compliance, because what you don't want to have happen is you build out a solution and then get blocked at the last minute.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Just really quickly, I'm going to